those of you who were with us last year, you may recall that Brian and I did a similar sort of a talk on California oddities, where we took you for a tour around the state and showed you some of the interesting challenges that we have in California. And so this year we thought we'd touch a little bit on some of that and dive deeper into certain airports that seem to cause a particular amount of problems for people. So feel free to chime in at any time there, Brian.
Absolutely. And some of those airports, it seems like we have talked about before, and everybody has, maybe heard this before, but it really bears repeating because there's still many problems. So if you can actually help spread the word on that as well. And also that we have some of our panelists will be helping answer questions in the Q&A. So feel free if you chat. We're not monitoring that, but we do have people watching the Q&A. So be sure and post your questions in there, and they'll be relayed to us at the end.
Yep. So we'll give you some more further instructions on some of that as we go here. But we thought we'd just take a quick little review on some of the things that we touched on last year, and we'll dive into some specific airports with IFR and VFR procedures both that seem to cause problems for pilots. Like Brian mentioned, we talked about them before, and these are airports that we'll be talking about again and again because problems seem to keep happening at these places, and they're really fairly easily avoidable with a little bit of research. So first off, I'll make a couple of recommendations here that if you set up your Zoom with a couple of these settings, it might make things a little bit easier. The first one is hide non-video participants. So you should only then see Brian and me. We don't want you to see anybody else, at least for a few minutes here. And if we're that bad for you, you can just put a little shade, something over the side of the screen there so you don't see us. The best benefit will be if you get it to the full screen mode, and if you can set your follow hosts view or put it in gallery mode. Again, that'll help you see our slideshow as well as Brian and me. If you want to be seeing Brian and me, I'm not sure why you would, but
I don't know why they'd want to do that either. But also, you can resize there's a line, a little grab bar between the videos of us and the slideshow, and you can move that left and right and alternate how big we are, how big the slideshow is.
Exactly. And finally, especially if you're watching on an iPad, you might find it helpful if you turn off your chat notifications, just in case somebody does put a message in the chat there. It'll normally put up a big box there that obscures the screen, and you can turn that notification off pretty easily. So I suggest you do that. So today there are several presentations, this one and the Kings and Captain Gary Schenk later on this afternoon. All of these presentations will be valid for Wings credit. So if you want Wings credit for this, the important thing to know is there's nothing you need to do. Don't send an email to anybody. Don't need to call anybody. We'll look through the registration database afterwards. We'll see what times you were on, and we'll apply the credits appropriately based on that. This process will take up to a week or so, a week or 10 days. I'm going on vacation on Wednesday for 10 days, so I'm hoping to get it taken care of before I head off on vacation. So don't panic.
10 days off.
Yeah, can you believe it? Yeah, late October. I can't get a vacation in the summer. So
I know you've been on vacation since you had this job.
Right. Yeah, and I noticed, I don't know if you picked up in the when Carol was introducing us, she mentioned that we're both retired pilots. Did you know that you were retired, Brian?
I felt like I was retired ever since I got hired. I retired from a full-time flight instructor. Now I'm a part-time flight instructor.
Exactly. Yeah, me too. But no, we're both very much active pilots. And Brian was hoping to be doing this from home. I noticed that your studio behind you is a little bit different today. Brian, what's up with that?
Yeah, as it turns out, I'm in Boston, Massachusetts. I hauled 150 people here last night, landed at 6 a.m. this morning, got a nice nap, and you don't want me to turn off that background. My hotel room is less than stellar.
It can't be responsible for what might happen.
Exactly.
Well, for having flown all night, you look remarkably good.
Thank you.
So if you have questions for Brian and me, particularly during this part of the presentation, we encourage you to use the Q&A button down. Usually it's toward the bottom of the screen. If you post your question in there, he or I, or perhaps Paul or Andy will pick up on this question and break in with it during the presentation here. And we'll try to get you slot it in with an answer there if we, to the greatest extent that we can. If you have a chat message back and forth to other pilots or just general conversation, that's great. Just use the chat box. We'll try to keep an eye on that for questions if something turns up, but no guarantees in the chat box. Much better shot at it if you put it in the Q&A. Jolie mentioned some door prizes. We get to give away 3 door prizes today, Brian. Did you know that?
3 door prizes? We're giving away 3 of them?
3.
Can we win them?
I don't know. Jolie knows. Hopefully.
Yeah.
But the first is an oximeter from a Precise Flight, as Jolie mentioned. Here's a picture of it. It's a pretty nice little unit. I carry one of these in my airplane, and especially if you fly much above 10,000 feet, you should probably have one of these too. And
I have one
learn a little bit about it.
I carry one with me at the airline. In fact, last night, having been flying all night long, I used it mid-flight. And interestingly, just to see what it would be like, you know, I was like around 93%, and cabin altitude was about 6,000 feet. I put the oxygen mask on, and within seconds, you could actually see the oxygen getting back up to 99%, like with less than a minute. Amazing.
That's an interesting test. I've never done that. I'm going to have to do that.
Yeah, try it.
Yeah, I normally run mid-low 90s when I'm at about a 6,000 foot cabin altitude in the 787 as well.
Yeah, and remember, for night vision, the AIM recommends that above 5,000 feet, you will suffer a degradation of night vision when you're at altitude. Above 5,000 feet at night, you'll lose some of your night vision.
Yeah, so it's a great idea to use one of these things, and I recommend that you use it on the ground before, when you're not in the airplane sometime. Get an idea what your baseline reading is. There's a whole bunch of other caveats around it. I found out recently that it will give you an inaccurate reading if you use it in a high light area. So if you can shade the thing to cut down on the external light as much as possible, it'll give you a more accurate reading.
I did not know that.
That from an anesthesiologist friend of mine. So he knows what he's talking about.
Cool.
We also get to give away this AOPA travel pack, t-shirt, a tumbler, and a packing cube. That's pretty awesome. And we get to give away a headset. This is the one I really want.
Wow. Those are great.
Almost a $900 value. So over $1,000 of prizes that you and I get to give away here in a few minutes.
That's awesome.
But first, they got to sit through the rest of this presentation.
I don't know, $900 might be a better value than sitting through the presentation.
Yeah, exactly. So like we talked about last year, there's a lot of interesting things that make flying in California particularly challenging. One is we've got a lot of terrain. We've got natural terrain. We got some of the highest mountains in the country are right here. We got human terrain. 3 of the biggest cities in the country are here, over 1 million population. And it just complicates the things that we get to deal with when we're flying along over here.
And there are a lot of pilots, most of the pilots in our country that, you know, other in the flatland and all parts of the country that don't have what we have. And they come out here, and I talk to many pilots who are very intimidated to come out here because of all this. It's very different than the rest of our country.
Yeah, I gave a flight review a number of years ago to a cousin from upstate New York, and I dropped the LA TAC chart in front of him, and his jaw just dropped on the floor with how much yellow there is, how much blue there is, red, all these airspace everywhere. It is intimidating. And,
exactly. And on that photo or near it of the sectional, there is the lowest point in the U.S. and the highest point in the U.S., both here in California.
Yep, we've got Mount Whitney is just up off the top there, I think.
And Death Valley down.
And Death Valley over here to the east just a little bit. So the highest and the lowest, the busiest and the crowdedest.
A lot of the ests are here in California.
So we California pilots have to be on the ball. Now we also get, as we just touched on, a ton of airspace. And as you fly across the country, you get to places like Dallas or Chicago, Denver, where the typical class Bravo airspace is the classic upside down wedding cake. It's a circle with tears in it. But here in California, our class Bravos look different, very confusing, very complicated. You really can't get around without a TAC chart, or at least some knowledge of the airspace here, and work with ATC to find your way around. So this really complicates matters. We got a wide variety of flight activities we touched on last year. We got a gazillion military training routes around the country. We've got gliders, we've got condors, we've got spaceports. We've got it all going on here. And stuff that you'll never see anywhere else in the rest of the country exists on our sectional and tack charts. And we've also got a whole host of interesting airports. And this is what we kind of touched on last year quite a bit. We took you for a tour across California and we visited a lot of spots here. And we're not going to do that this year. We're going to dive in on a couple of these and a couple more that we added on with some interesting things, like I mentioned earlier, that cause a lot of problems. So these are some of the airports we have that cause problems. And then we'll visit out with a couple of just really interesting spots.
And if you want to see any of those that we covered last year on that route of flight that we just showed, the last slide on here will show my website with the links to the last year's presentation, and you can feel free to take a look at that later.
Yeah, and I believe it's also on my YouTube channel, and I'll point you toward that at the end as well.
Right, the entire presentation from last year would be on Mike's YouTube channel, absolutely.
Right. So I thought we'd start out with the same place we started out last year with Shelter Cove. And we touched on this one last year. It's a coastal airport. There's no instrument approaches. And it's typically about this time of the year. It's under a marine layer a lot of the time. So it's difficult to get in and out. But I happened to, last year when we made this talk, neither Brian nor I had been there before. We'd heard about it, both of us, but had never been there. And I had the opportunity about 2 months ago now with my wife and I to fly up there for the weekend. And now, having been there, I've got to tell you, you need to go to this place. It's a beautiful airport. This is a picture I took on the downwind leg. There's just really nothing overly complex about it. It's got a ridge line on the land side of it, obviously, ocean here on the left side of it. Here's the approach end of the runway, and the tie down zones are right beside the runway. The hotel that we stayed in was right on the water here. We stayed in that room right there. And every morning we could wake up to the sound of sea lions barking in the tide pools that are just off the hotel there. Really a beautiful place. There's a restaurant just next to the approach end of the runway. There's a campground right here. If you bring a tent, a whole bunch of people were camping over there. Beautiful little lighthouse just over here. And at the north end of the airport over here is another tie down zone. It was empty when I landed on Friday afternoon. By Saturday morning, there was a Lancer 4P there, and I'd heard come in. And there's also another restaurant over here. There's really only 2 restaurants in town, so not a lot to go on. But beautiful, quiet, very calm, very peaceful little visit for a little weekend getaway. I can't recommend it highly enough. So as we contemplate, and we set out on this tour here, it's important to keep aware of the different kinds of resources that we have available as we begin to plan for one of these. So some of the resources you might involve here are going to be your electronic flight bags. This particular photograph comes out of ForeFlight, of course. I always like to go to the airport page. You can see down here, it's a tab on the lower left corner there. Go to airports, type in your airport at the top here, and click on the comments button right here, and you'll find this page. And you can see remarks and comments. And the distinction here is that the remarks are official remarks that come from the airport manager. And these are the same comments that you'll see if you look on AirNav, or even some of them in the airport facility directory, or what formerly was known as the airport facility directory, now is the chart supplement. These are official comments. And if you click on the comments button over here instead, you get comments from people like you and me and Brian about this airport, operating them. The ramp tie downs are in horrible shape, or the restaurant's really good, or what have you. So this is other pilots talking to you about their experience at that airport, and it can be very valuable. Other apps have similar capability, so it's a great place to start with your flight planning. I mentioned the chart supplement. This is a great place to go for all kinds of comments. Brian, wasn't there one you wanted to touch on here? This happens to be Big Bear. We're going to visit Big Bear in more detail in just a moment. But
yeah, I know they have a lot of noise sensitive comments, and particularly in Big Bear, you want to make a left 10-degree turn, no matter which way you're taking off, to avoid noise sensitive areas. And you wouldn't know that if you don't read the book, and the airport remarks that are in there also mimic what you'd see in ForeFlight, like Mike suggested, if you're looking at the remarks section. Yeah,
exactly. And this takes you to the next set of online tools. You've got all sorts of great resources. AirNav is one that I've used for a long time. What I really recommend, we're going to show you a bunch of examples of this, is if you just Google the airport name, you can often find a pilot association page for the airport or the airport management page for the airport, and you'll get a lot of very valuable information. We'll show you a couple examples of that as we go. Online, where was this stuff 30, 40 years ago when we were learning how to fly, trying to plan a trip?
Oh, I'd have been amazed. Could you imagine if back when you were learning to fly, Mike, someone just pulled out an iPad and with a "you are here" moving around on it and showing you exactly where you are and where the airspace was?
I could not. It's an amazing tool.
We've come a long way.
Absolutely. Local knowledge is excellent as well. If you can't find any information, or even if you do, but you want to find out just a little bit more, this particular example is from AirNav. But in AirNav, you have the ownership and the owner of the airport, and you have the manager information here with his phone number. You can call that person and get their information on how to fly in there. And don't call this one anymore. This was Catalina from last year. Just 2 weeks ago, the old airport manager just relocated to the East Coast. So he's not over here at Catalina anymore. We have a new airport manager. But the idea is, this is another resource. Go dive into this and call somebody and get the information that you're looking for. Don't show up uninformed.
Right. And that is the takeaway. Yeah. So if you're going somewhere you haven't been before, obviously you want to do as much research as you can. So the takeaway here is that we're going to tell you about some airports and some of the really detailed information about those airports, but you don't memorize that. Just know how to go get it, how to use these resources, and learn how to use Google Earth as well, and how to pan and tilt and rotate around. It's an invaluable tool to look around the airport before you're in the air.
Yeah, I like your point, Brian, about not memorizing things. And one reason to not memorize things is I don't have enough brain cells in my head to memorize things.
Yeah.
But the real reason is that information changes. It's like this example here at Catalina. If you had memorized that information, it's wrong now. So best to get the freshest stuff.
Very good point. That's why rules of thumb don't work for me. I got 2 of them. I get the wrong thumb.
They point in opposite directions.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, can
Paul,
we jump in for a quick question?
Yeah.
Paul Donahue writes, I use a different email address for Wings than I used to register for this seminar. How do I tell you my FAASafety.gov email address? Can you answer that one live real quick?
Well, you should have registered using your FAASafety.gov email address, but I do have an email address if you need to for exactly that reason. It's Cap Mike Fast, CAPN, like November, Mike, MIKE, Fast, FAAST, @gmail.com. And maybe if you post that in the chat box there, that'll help somebody out.
I'll let you. Thank you.
Moving on here. So we're going to start our tour today with Van Nuys. Take it away, Brian.
Yeah, so Van Nuys is particularly interesting because we have all these other airports around there. And if you look at, there's Whiteman, there's Burbank with a high airline traffic going into there. Then we have Van Nuys, which has a particularly high corporate, I think the busiest corporate airport in the world next to Teterboro, if not the busiest. And also those 2 parallel runways with a lot of training going on. And in that, those are runways 16 left and right. And on the 16 left, there's typically a lot of aircraft in the pattern. And on 16 right, there's typically a steady stream of corporate jets coming in from on the ILS from a long straight in. So it's not unusual to be flying in on a final for 16 right and be very close to a Cessna 172 or other training aircraft in the pattern for 16 left. And it's very, there's a very high hazard there. And so that really needs to be mitigated. You'll see there's another airport, I think Reed Hillview, where they have parallel runways and they recommend angling in on final. I think that's a good idea to do here as well. And if you were to just go into this airport without doing any research and you departed 16 left or right and to the west and you made a right turn a little bit early, you're going to be doing something a little bit dangerous, because if you look at Burbank, and you're going to see the approach going into Burbank, and this is an instrument approach actually into Van Nuys, but it's utilizing the Burbank localizer. So it's fly the localizer until you fly right over the top of Van Nuys, and then you're going to circle to land, like entering a downwind for the runways. So circle to land. But you can see if you made a right turn out of Van Nuys after departing south, you're going to be climbing right up the pike of that localizer, the ILS going into Burbank. So the airport facility directory tells pilots not to make any turns before the flood basin. So you can see departing southbound, you can see that Sepulveda flood control basin, very apparent from the air. And you want to wait until you reach that to make your right turn. Therefore, you've passed the localizer inbound to Burbank. Also, the FAA building, just incidentally, is just off to the southwest of the airport. And if you make an early turn there, you can probably expect a phone call for having done so, because it's a very big hazard. And if you have a very high performance airplane that can get up to 1,600 feet or so, again, this is not published for VFR, but local knowledge knows that, hey, there's aircraft crossing about over the departure end of that runway in Van Nuys going into Burbank at about 1,500 feet. So you want to stay low crossing under that localizer. And here's another interesting problematic departure, IFR departure out of Van Nuys. It's the Canoga 3 departure. It may be 4 now, I don't know, but in any event, it's a very simple departure, but there's been a very big problem with a propensity of pilots doing it incorrectly, and that may have something to do with the way it appears on their GPSs. But if you look at this right here, you can see all it is runway heading 163 until you reach a 2.2 DME, and then it's a right turn to a heading at 213. So it's 2 headings until you're told to do otherwise. But what we're getting is a lot of pilots going direct to IPHO. And Mike, if you could spotlight that intersection. So they're making the right turn to IPHO. And I think that might have something to do with the way it looks on the GPS, because you're supposed to just fly 163 and at 2.2 DME, turn right to 213. But look at the GNS 530 right there, how it depicts this SID with it just drawing a line from the airport to IPHO. Know that you're not supposed to fly that line, even though you've loaded the SID into the GNS. You're supposed to fly that heading until told otherwise. And the loss of comm in a box that says, the loss of comm procedures may be a little misleading. Also, if you read that, it tells you to, after a certain amount of time, if you don't get a hold of ATC, to go direct to IPHO. That's not what you want to do. You don't want to make that turn until ATC tells you to, as long as you're talking to them. And another, is it the GTN 750 that you have? Yeah, so you look at that. It shows it a little bit better. You can see the white line form of the white triangles there. That's the 213 heading where it should be. And it says vectors at the end of that. It's a little bit more clear as to what you're supposed to do. So just be sure you know how and there's IPHO, which you'll get vectors to. At some point, they'll clear you direct to that. And in my experience, usually they'll give you direct CASTA or Suana, another downline affix rather than IPHO. So remember, this is a vector departure. And it says that in the name of it. So be sure you know how your avionics shows it, know what the procedure is, and remember, you're flying a heading. Don't link it up nav and don't follow the purple line if it's telling you to go the wrong place.
And isn't this one of the most commonly violated SIDs in the country?
It actually is. It is, and I think it's going down. We're trying to get the word out, and there is a SID out of Whiteman. I think someone just posted that, and also out of Santa Ana, there are some SIDs that do the same exact thing. Be very careful. We have many SIDs in the Southern California basin where you do just that. It's 1 or 2 headings, and they're headings only until you're told to do otherwise.
Yeah, so if you're a child of the magenta line, you have to understand there are times when you are basically on a dead reckoning type navigation, on a heading. It's a sign for something. You don't have to always be on the pink line, especially if you're flying a GNS 530 or 430.
Correct. Yeah, so be cautious, be very careful about that.
Okay, I think you've been to this airport a little bit, Brian, haven't you?
I have, and as it turns out, my airplane is sitting there right now
Oh,
in a hangar with awaiting an engine overhaul. And I guess there's a long wait on cylinders right now, so it's going to be a while before I fly there. But in any event, if you were to look at this sectionally, you've never been to Santa Paula, and say they're landing, those are runway 4 and 22 is what that runway is. And if you're going to come in on 45, say they're using runway 4, and you say, I'm going to enter a right downwind runway 4 because it says right pattern for runway 4 right there in the box. So if you envision that entering on a standard entry on a 45, looks like, okay, easy peasy. But if you look at the airport elevation, Santa Paula is 250 feet. And then just off to the east, southeast, you see a peak there at 2,700 feet, almost a 2,500 foot grade difference. And it's a very steep grade because the airport, well, how far is that? So one little trick to kind of see how far that is. And again, this chart is a little bit deceiving because that terrain doesn't look like it looks in real life on this chart. You probably wouldn't even notice this. And many pilots have tried coming into Santa Paula on a 45. But if you wanted to gauge a distance between the runway and that peak of those towers at 2,709 feet, you can see the line of longitude right there. And just as a remember, as a rule of thumb, that on these sectional or the TAC chart, this happens to be a TAC, that 1 minute of longitude between those ticks, that's 1 nautical mile. And so looking at the distance from the airport to those towers, it's probably about 2 nautical miles. And if you fly a pattern that's half a mile away, remember there's a gradient, it has to somehow get from 250 to 2,700 feet. It's pretty tight. If you're going to come in 2 miles out on a 45 at pattern altitude, you're going to be flying IFR and cumula granite, and that's going to be pretty ugly. So for that very reason, if you were to read the chart supplement or the book formerly known as the Airport Facility Directory, there's a note in there that says no 45-degree entries to the pattern here. And that's for a very good reason, which is very apparent when you get there. Yeah, there's a lot going on at this airport, and they also have a website that shows the specific ways that they'd like you to get into the pattern. And a lot of people come here for that fuel price that's up there. So they stop into Santa Paula for fuel, for that fuel. Notice the pattern altitude is 850 feet, and the airport elevation, remember, was 250 feet. So this is a pretty low pattern at 600 feet, one of the lowest. So bear that in mind. So you've not only got all this terrain to the south, but you've got a very low traffic pattern as well. They also have, to complicate things, some very sensitive, noise sensitive areas. And this website also shows, if you click on this where it says flying into Santa Paula up on the top of their website there, it'll show you, you can blow up some images, yeah, right there, of how they'd like you to enter the pattern there. And there are some very, very powerful hangar lawyers there that will not hesitate to let you know that you did not enter the way you should have at Santa Paula. But so if you're approaching from the east and they're landing on runway 22, this picture is looking toward the west. So if you looking down runway 4, you're to fly over the city, kind of upwind at 1,500 feet. It's a noise sensitive area, so they want you as quiet as possible and 1,500 feet high. Then when you get out to Peck Road, they recommend, and it's a prominent road out there to the west, where kind of the end of the housing area, descend from the 1,500 feet down to pattern altitude of 850. So yeah, 700-foot drop on that, heading toward the mountains. And it's kind of scary the first time you go there and look, well, here I am descending in toward the mountains out there to the west or to the south while you're on that crosswind leg. You'll notice in the white text here, we have a junkyard that you kind of be aiming for. That's a reporting point, and you see the blue dots coming in. If you're coming around the corner of the mountains from Santa Paula, you can come in over the Saticoy Bridge, which is right there on the top of the circle there, Saticoy Bridge. Then the junkyard, which is very prominent because you'll see thousands of cars parked closer than they should be in a big area. And then you continue on the downwind leg there, which is not necessarily parallel to the runway. It kind of angles toward it, but right over the golf course. It's for runway 22 left downwind, and the base is normally turned past the 12th Street Bridge, which is very prominent, crossing the river, which never has water in it. And there's very noise sensitive, so they like you to follow this and not do an extended downwind either. They like you to keep it pretty tight. You'll be amazed at how tight the locals keep their pattern. And on the base to final, you'll notice a note there that says call all your legs on the CTAF 122.9. They really want to hear all your legs. Stay aware of what's going on, because there's many airplanes there without radios. They will use the technique of saying, the color of the aircraft, left base, runway 22, Santa Paula, not necessarily the end number. So you get a lot of tail draggers, a lot of aerobatic airplanes there coming back in from the aerobatic area just off to the side of that as well.
I get to fly that in a Spitfire?
Yeah. I got a note popped up that I can't see where you were highlighting, but yeah, they get all kinds of fun airplanes. And that kind of points out the fact that there are a lot of very unique airplanes of varied performance capabilities going in and out of this airport. A lot of air show type airplanes, a lot of high performance aerobatic airplanes coming in and out of there. So just be very careful, be on the alert, keep your eyes outside, and be familiar with this arrival procedure before going into there. And it's on their website.
I've seen gyrocopters and weight shift trikes and gliders and all sorts of other aircraft there.
Yeah, and if you're a helicopter pilot, there's some notes to you guys too, as to where to land on the airport and how to do so. There's a helipad right there. Yep, that's showing it right there. But do take a look at the airport facility directory entry. Not only does it say no 45-degree entries, and if you look at this photo here, you can kind of get an idea. If you were to make a 45 entry, that's going to be a pretty steep descent down to the downwind leg. It's not going to be comfortable. It also mentions no straight-in approaches. While straight-in approaches are legal, we could always throw that topic out there and have a fun conversation. Just say straight-in approaches at non-towered airports, discuss, and we'll get a lot of opinions about that. Santa Paula, they don't want you doing that. For a very good reason. A lot of traffic, many aircraft not even having radios. So they want everybody flying the standard pattern there, so everybody knows what to expect. But the AFD actually does say no straight-in approaches. If the winds are out of the east, then they also have a way of entering the pattern for that as well. And again, that downwind leg at 850 feet, you're actually flying over some terrain there. So again, 1,500 feet over the city, right crosswind transition out to the east, descending down to 850 feet toward the golf course, not necessarily parallel to the runway, but heading toward the golf course and to keep your distance from the airport. Also bear in mind the departures are doing a noise sensitive departure. So that's another reason these arrivals are the way they are. Departing the other way was a left turn. You can see if you're departing runway 22, to the southwest, there's a noise sensitive area highlighted in orange down there to the left. So the aircraft will be turning left as they depart to avoid that mobile home park, which is a very noise sensitive area. And that kind of points it towards the downwind. And that's why you've got to be very careful about the way you're arriving into Santa Paula. But my other piece of advice is, and I tell my student pilots, if the winds are out of the east, you probably don't want to be coming here, because it's going to be a Mr. Toad's wild ride. That's normally a off limits thing for my students. If Santa Ana winds are going on, it's not a fun place to fly into regarding the winds. Otherwise, it's always a fun place to fly into.
So moving over to Cable Airport, this is an interesting one just on the north side of Ontario Airport. This is the oldest privately owned public use airport. The Cable family has owned it since 1940s or something. Great little restaurant. Honestly, I don't know the name. I know the old one burned down. It was called Maniac Mike's. I don't remember if the new one is still called Maniac Mike's or something else. But this one is complicated by the terrain to the north. Mount Baldy is right there, which is pushing 9,000 feet elevation, just a few miles north of the airport. And to the south, we have this Class Charlie airspace from Ontario Airport. And there's a little cutout of this surface area, surface to 5,000 feet. So you really don't want to be extending your downwind leg on this. There is no letter of agreement or understanding for the pilots to extend this downwind leg and operate into that Ontario class Charlie. So if you don't have adequate spacing against the airplane in front of you, you might not be able to descend and land. You might just have to turn base and turn final and basically do a go around from pattern altitude.
Right, and that's yeah, that's interesting. And so to enter the class Charlie, that it's 5,000 to the surface. And just to reiterate, you need two-way radio communication with SoCal to enter that airspace, and you're not likely to have that if you're in the pattern at Cable. Interesting little factoid: why is Cable the name of the airport underlined?
Because it's a reporting point.
Exactly, yeah, VFR reporting point. You can see the flag on the airport, and the underlined word is the name of the reporting point. Yeah, exactly. Very good, very good.
Hey, I passed.
Yeah, I thought I was going to get you on that one.
Yeah, no,
I have yet to
stump
you.
Gonna have to get up pretty early in the morning to stay ahead of me.
Well, I did.
Oh, you never went to bed, did you?
Fair point. I think I went to bed pretty early in the morning.
So, and this is also just nestled right up against the Class Delta airspace of Brackett Airport. We'll touch on Brackett in a moment. So you got a bunch of airports right here, and typically Cable has a pretty good price on gas right now. So I'll make a run over there for fuel. It's about 70 or 80 cents cheaper than it is at Fullerton Airport. So I'll go make that run for fuel. And so I come in from the southwest here, and I'll call Brackett Tower and get a transition through their Class Delta surface area and go right into the downwind from Cable Airport, right up there's this little wash thing here. It's pretty visible from the air. So that's one way to get into that airport that I found works pretty well.
And I noticed that Charlie, the outer ring of the Charlie for Ontario begins at 2,700 feet. And the Class Delta at Brackett there goes up to, but not including 2,700. So unless you can fit between 2,699 and 2,700, you got to talk to somebody there.
Well, I can do that. I don't know if you can do that.
I definitely can't do that.
And Brackett Airport elevation is 1,000 feet. Their pattern altitude is 1,000 feet above that. So on your downwind at Brackett, you're at 2,000 feet, which you can just barely see some terrain here. I'll touch on that in a little moment when we talk about Brackett. So, but it's very complex airspace here. It's very complex terrain here, and best to go do some research. And this is our first example, or actually second example now, of what I consider to be a pretty good website for the airport. If you just Google Cable Airport, you'll get pointed eventually to this website, and it includes documents like this that illustrates these issues with how they'd like you to enter that traffic pattern. From the north, you're going to cross over midfield and enter the downwind leg, either 24 or 6. And this is runway 24 on this left side and runway 6 on the right side. So they have the arrows here where they would like you to be flying if you're entering the pattern. So great idea when anytime you're dealing with an airport that's up next to either a physical or a man-made obstruction, it's a good idea to go find some more information to help guide you as to how to get in and out. And this one was interesting too. If you remember, when we looked at this page here, the AWAS gives us an AWAS frequency, but it's an AWAS 3P. What's
yeah,
that,
and when I
Brian?
first saw that, I'm like, what is AWAS 3P? Some interesting ideas came to mind, but I looked it up, and so I sent this to Mike. I said, we should throw that in there. Always bear in mind when you see that, you can find this list of different AWASs in the AIM in Chapter 7. And AWAS 3P means it's an AWAS 3, but it provides the same as AWAS 3, but it also has a precipitation identification sensor. In other words, when it's snowing there at Cable, it can tell the difference between rain and snow.
And that's a big problem at Cable. They get precipitation so rarely, they don't remember whether it's snow or rain or sleet or something else. But boy, when and if it does happen, they've got the tools.
Yeah. Us Southern Californians, what is that stuff falling from the sky?
Yeah, it's a major emergency. So we touched a moment ago on Brackett, and that's just right next door. So let's take a little dive in on Brackett. I mentioned that terrain was a big issue here, and this is right out of the maps on my iPad. The airport is here, and we've got cumulogranite, all quadrants, all around that airport. So that's out to the east here, it's not so bad. Here's the LA County Fairgrounds. The Fairplex is right here. You got the horse quarters are over there. But your runways are right here, and they point right over this Pudding Stone Reservoir that's just off the end of the runway. And houses are all over this hill and a few on this hill, not quite so much. But yeah, if you lose an engine there, you're not going to be able to make a turnaround back to the runway. You're going to have to go into the drink there. So I used to teach at Brackett Airport a million years ago, right before I got my airline job. And so I spent a lot of time there, but it's been a while.
That's another fair point for looking at Google Earth before you go to an airport. The sectional charts and the terminal area charts just don't give justice to the terrain that exists around these airports.
Yeah, Google Earth is a great tool for that sort of thing. And there really isn't, this website I've listed at the top here is kind of not an official, not super useful web page for you, but it does, if you poke around that site a little bit, you end up with this document that's got a little bit of history about the airport and some information on it. So it might be interesting if you're considering flying in there to go to the horse races or go to the LA Fair when that's in session. A lot of good information available. So let's go head over to Big Bear, shall we?
Big Bear is a fun airport to go to, up in the mountains. Everybody loves going there. There are some beautiful aspects of going to Big Bear, going skiing, going boating, all kinds of fun summer things to do. The restaurant on the field is great. So it's a popular airport. Research before going there is very much deserved. In fact, I'd even recommend to check out with an instructor. And if you can get a local instructor, someone who's very familiar with Big Bear, I'd recommend that as well.
So looking at this chart, Brian, what are these white lines here?
Those are the snow lines. Yeah, that's where you get snow.
Snow only inside those lines?
Yeah, only in those lines. Yeah, that's where the snow, they plowed that apparently or something. But no, that's where the border of the terminal area chart. And I believe there's one for the LA and also another one there. I think, I'm not sure which one, but anyway, those are for the other charts and the insets. And here is the terminal area chart. Notice how it looks a little bit different. We get a little bit more detail, but the airport looks different, I noticed. Why is it? It's on a square block there. And if we go back to the, we look at the sectional, we can see it's round with tabs on the outside, means it has services, and it's round. But here on this chart, it's square. Why is that? And so to know, we look at the legend. But just remember, that's when you can't answer something, go to the legend and look at it. Most of the time, the answer is there. And you'll see that on the terminal, on the sectional, which was what this is, that hard surface runways between 1,500 feet and 8,069 feet are in a circle, and anything greater than 8,069 feet is in a square blocked off depiction like that. Those numbers are different on the sectional. So if we go to the next one, you'll see on the terminal area chart, a square is 1,500 feet or greater if it has corners on it. And if it's less than 1,500 feet, you're going to have a circle image. Why then would we go back, and I asked myself, why would it be 8,069 feet? Why don't they just say 8,000 feet?
I was going to ask you that.
Feet? What's that?
I was going to ask you that.
Go ahead.
Why is it 8,069 feet?
I have no idea. No, a little bit of research showed me that the reason it's 8,069 is if you look at the circle, the size of the icon, they're always the same and always to scale. And as it turns out, 8,069 feet is the longest runway they can fit. The runways are to scale, that they could fit inside that circular icon. So anything greater than that needs to be a squared off, elongated icon like that. So it's limited by the, what's that?
Some kind of polygon thing.
Polygon thingy, yeah, depending on how many runways, but it's the size of the icon that limits the runway image to 8,069 feet. A little known fact.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I always wondered about that.
That's a good one to win, win a beer on.
Right. Stump the examiner one, probably. So here's an example, another example I wanted to show you of a website that's really useful. And it takes you to this beautiful website with an illustration of somebody out there enjoying some of the summertime activities that Brian was talking about a moment ago. Just beautiful up there, like he says. But with that, all that cumulogranite and all terrains, it brings in some operational issues that you can kind of think about as a pilot. How are you going to get in there? And it's also full of noise sensitive areas, in addition to the terrain and the lake and so forth. So the airport and the pilot group up there has done a great job of creating these diagrams that are available on that website that show you the recommended entry into the airport. So in this example, we're showing the approach for runway 26 from the northeast out here somewhere. And actually, if you look at this live on the website, you first pull it up, it's animated. So you can see this airplane flying in. I think that's pretty cool. So they want you to come in your upwind leg, parallel and beside the runway a little bit there, cross over midfield, enter downwind. This little red lighted hill here is a school. They want you to avoid flying over that. And this is the arrival from the southwest. This is the one I normally do. They don't want you flying over the lake direct into the downwind because that's where the departure traffic is going to go that we'll see in just a moment. And you can't do a 45 entry like you would do at most airports because you got mountains over here with all the ski areas on it. So you have to kind of hug the mountain parallel to the ridge line here and parallel to the south shore of the lake along Big Bear Lake Boulevard there, and then do your 45 pretty close into the airport, closer than you are at many fields.
If I might add, you can think of it as a wide downwind and then transitioning to a close in downwind, just as a technique, a safety, and to keep quieter. I come in pretty high. I like to always be gliding distance from the airport when I'm doing that. And also watch out for straight in traffic and aircraft with no radios here. Again, a very big preponderance of that.
Yep. So this is an example of the departure route out to the northeast off of runway 26. If you read the chart supplement and all the airport information, they recommend a 10-degree left turn after takeoff. And the reason for that is there's a school right on this little spit of land right here, and they don't want you flying right over that school. So just after you clear the runway, they want you to fly down the middle of the lake, no matter which direction you're departing. And then if you're going to make a downwind departure here out to the northeast or to the east, it's going to be a continuous turn here. There really isn't going to be a crosswind leg on that departure. And I guess that was it for Big Bear.
Fun place to fly, but also worth adding is please check your density altitude. There are too many accidents there as a result of density altitude. And just because you may have a turbocharged aircraft also doesn't mean it's going to perform like it does at sea level. You may get 30 inches of manifold pressure, but it still doesn't mean you're going to have the same exact pressure and performance. So please look at your density altitude. I mean, if you're in the pattern there at 8,000 feet-ish, remember, just think about how your airplane climbs at 8,000 feet. There are just way too many problems here, and be very careful about checking the charts, looking at the density altitude, the capabilities of your airplane. And, what I was going to say that, Melissa, I saw just posted, make sure your wing and your propeller still are suffering from the thin air. While your engine might get a little bit of a boost from the turbo, the propeller is still trying to spin in thin air, and the wing is also suffering from the thin air up there as well, the much higher density altitude. And it's typically warmer than standard there, meaning the density altitude is going to be a lot higher than the field altitude there, and it can be 10, 11, 12,000 feet sometimes. So just think about how well your airplane performs at that point. You take a 172 up there with 4 people. I implore you to check your performance and be very cautious about that. There are too many accidents as a result of the density altitude there.
Yeah, just about once a year, somebody ends up in the lake there for not flying the airplane correctly. And yeah, the turbocharger helps the engine, but it doesn't help the propeller or the wing. And your flight controls are less effective. And also a standard day atmosphere, remember, is 15 degrees Celsius at sea level. It goes down about 2 degrees per 1,000 feet. So if you're up there at 7,000 feet, your standard temperature is going to be 1 degree. Well, that's 34 degrees Fahrenheit. In the summertime, even if it's a cool day, let's say it's 60 degrees up there, you're well above standard temperature. So your density altitude is going to be very high.
And I'll guarantee it was like that when we just looked at the picture of that hiker up there. I'll guarantee it was
Yeah.
warmer than that at that point as well. And,
Yep.
and another aspect of the high density altitude is that pilots aren't quite aware of or not totally thinking about is that your true airspeed is going to be higher. So your perception of seeing how fast the ground moves, you're going to feel like you have enough airspeed. You're taking off and you see the ground rushing by. It's like I normally can fly the airplane. It lifts off when it looks like this to me. But you're not going to have the airflow over the wing that you need until you're at a much higher airspeed. So your true airspeeds are much higher at that point. So it's a very deceptive on takeoff and landing.
And another effect of this that people seldom take into account is that your best rate of climb airspeed is slower at altitude than it is at sea level. So you really need to look at the climb performance charts in the performance section of your airplane. It's going to have recommended climb V speeds, VY. And if you use the same VY at Big Bear that you use at sea level, you're not going to be getting all the performance out of your airplane. So these are reasons that you need to get with an experienced, seasoned instructor to go learn how to fly up in the mountains before you do it for real.
Absolutely. And just as a note, the most light aircraft trainer types, 172 around that size, about 1 knot per 1,000 feet is how much of a reduction in VY. And very, very experienced pilots will be rotating too early when they reach what appears to be enough flying speed on takeoff.
Okay, moving on. Let's go up to the Bay Area now. You used to fly up there a little bit, I think.
I did. I went to San Jose State and I flight instructed out of San Jose for those 4 years.
Just around the corner.
Yep.
So I thought we'd look at San Carlos. This is where Max Trescott is based. He does a lot of flying out of this airport. And as you can see by this section of the TAC chart, it is nestled right up next to all these heavy blue lines, which are the San Francisco class Bravo airspace. So we've got a ton of airspace issues at this airport. And this is another example of what I think is a pretty good airport webpage. So if you head to this page and look in the pilot resources, you end up with a diagram that looks, I didn't do very good on that, did I? But here's a diagram of the airport here and the different patterns for entry and exit going every which way. If you weren't confused before you looked at this diagram, you're sure to be confused afterwards. But the big thing when I flew up there a few years ago, actually CalPilots had one of our annual meetings there just a few years ago. When you depart, there is this diamond-shaped waterway. That is very obvious where it is, and they want you to turn on the other side of that. So fly past that before you turn. But it's just another illustration of the resources available. With a little quick Googling, you can find this stuff.
Yeah, and it's sancarlosairport.org in case you can't read that. But again, we'll have a link to a website that has all these, there you go, websites on it with hyperlinks.
Okay, and over, we touched on Reed Hillview a moment ago. I've never been there, Brian, have you?
I have quite a bit, and there are 2 short parallel runways, and it's one of those airports where there's a lot of congested building stuff all around it and high traffic roads. There's a mall to the southeast. The only option for landing off the airport there would either be that highway with nothing but cars on it, or the road, or the mall, the roof of the mall to the southeast. But so it's kind of like Midway Airport, kind of like Burbank, where it's just a lot of buildings all around that airport and
Kind of like Fullerton.
Yeah, exactly, like Fullerton with 2 close, short parallel runways.
And I see a lot of airspace here. Again, we've got Class Charlie airspace for San Jose. We've got Class Bravo for San Francisco, reaches all the way out here. And again, a quick search of the internet will take you to the website, which has a really nice diagram here of the traffic pattern. And this is that angling final that you mentioned a minute ago, isn't it?
Right. And so with 2 parallel runways, I just think it's safer, it's better situational awareness. You can see the other final better to fly an angled final approach. I just believe unless there's some kind of noise issue or whatever, like Van Nuys, I think this would be a great time to angle in, stay a little bit further away from that other final approach, especially when you're on base and somebody's on final to the parallel, especially with a tailwind on base, you risk overshooting. angling in is a good technique like this, but be very aware of the noise sensitive airports. So I don't want to say it's always what you should do, but a good technique with close parallels like that.
And I would note that our friend Melissa Fowler posted a website in the chat box there for the Reed Hillview Airport. It's probably better than the one that I found. So thanks, Melissa. I appreciate that.
And I believe there's some, the CalPilots are doing something, and they'll talk about this later in their meeting about what, this is another one of our airports under attack here in California.
Very much so. All right, one of your favorites.
Love Kern Valley, fun, beautiful, great place to go camping. What kind of airspace is that with a magenta solid circle around it like that?
I was hoping you knew. I was going to ask you.
Oh, that's the, if we were to pan out of that whole picture, we'd see that airport lies within the MOA. And within that circle, the MOA is excluded below 1,500 feet.
Just enough for the traffic pattern.
Yeah, exactly. And another one of those.
They've got a beautiful website too. Check out this picture. Yeah,
that's pretty, and it's like that. And they got a great campground on that airport, right on the field with great showers, a restaurant right there. Great airport to just go pitch a tent next to your airplane, hang out. I mean, you'll have showers, and you don't have to cook, or if you don't want to, you go to the restaurant right there. Beautiful airport.
And my wife and I flew in there a few years ago. There used to be a B&B in town, and the woman who ran the B&B came out and picked us up at the airport, drove us into town, a short distance away. But one of the best breakfasts we've ever had at a B&B. It was really, really good.
Awesome.
And a big reason to come here is this river over here on the right side is the Kern River, Lake Isabella. It's just a little bit east of Bakersfield. There's a lot of really good whitewater rafting on that river, and that's a big reason that people travel up to this airport.
Right, and Ed just said that in the chat, but Melissa also posted a hyperlink to the website for this airport. Go check it out, you'll love it. And there's also, Melissa said there's a hotel nearby and a restaurant right on the edge of the airport.
But here's the fun part. We got cumulo granite all quadrants again. How do you get around that?
I love the Google Earth for going into this airport. And if I go here with a student, I don't typically send a student on a solo cross country to this airport for obvious reasons, but I will go here with them so that they can navigate this. And if you look at that coming over the, there's the campsite, coming over the lake and flying it downwind like that. But do look at this on Google Earth, and this looks like a Google Earth imagery here, and you can see all that terrain that you're flying right over on that downwind base and final, and then climbing out, of course, departing out over the lake as well.
Okay, oh, there we got back up north to Palo Alto.
Well, we're jumping north and south.
Yeah, we probably got these in the wrong order.
That's all right.
Well, we're trying to log a long cross country here, so this is one way to do it.
Getting our miles.
Yeah. So Palo Alto, this is another one I've been into. I've made a couple Angel Flight handoffs for passengers and pets at this airport. Again, it's nestled in with airspace, all quadrants. We got the class Bravo for San Francisco over here. We got the class Charlie for San Jose over here. I got Bay over here. We got lots of yellow populated areas over here. Stanford University is just right down in here. So really, really busy place.
Yeah, very busy. Also low altitude stuff going on there. And bear in mind, if you fly an airplane that can exceed 200 knots, you're below the Bravo airspace there. So you have a speed limit of 200 knots.
And this is one of the charts they have on this website showing the entry and exit patterns for this airport. And again, it's not oriented the right direction. It probably ought to be just about flipped 180 degrees.
Yeah.
But they don't want you making, if you're departing to the south here, they don't want you making turns toward the south directly. They want you to do a climbing turn, a climbing 270, no matter which airport or which runway you depart from, and head out that direction.
Yeah, think of it as a 270 over the bay and then depart away from the bay.
Yep. And this airport is so noise sensitive. They've made it super easy for the neighbors. This is the Sky Posse Palo Alto. So that right away should make you sit up and pay attention. How to complain. They even tell the neighbors how to complain, and they make it so easy. They got a button here, stopjetnoise.net, complain in one click. So Perfect. This is what we're up against when we're flying into some of these airports. And I know it's easy to say, well, they knew the airport was there. They shouldn't have bought the house or whatever. But I think it's also incumbent upon us to, as pilots, to be gentle pilots, respectful of our neighbors. If we want to continue to be able to fly in places like this, we should do our part too. And I think that's an easy thing. And most of the noise complaints that they're talking about is the arrival traffic into San Francisco, but they're spring loaded to report that traffic. You can bet if a small airplane is going to come over the airport, they're going to report that too. So Watsonville, this is an IFR procedure I found that's kind of interesting. Most DME ARC transitions, when you after you fly the ARC, you make a turn inbound toward the VOR, which is where the airport is. And Watsonville is one the opposite direction. So just kind of an interesting thing, I thought. And I have not yet done that approach from one of those transitions. Have you, Brian?
I have done that approach, and it's very important to get the correct radial set up. Obviously, the glass cockpits and moving maps make it much easier to orient yourself. But when I was, teaching up there, I once had a student, set in the 134 radial, not the 314, and bear in mind, which way the needle's moving and when you're going to intercept, and which way you're going to turn when you intercept. Good to study ahead of time.
Yeah, wow. I'm gonna have to do that one with the old steam gauges sometime.
Yeah, and that's a long leg, that's 6 miles after you turn inbound. Yeah, that with the steam gauges, this requires a little bit of head work and planning ahead.
It's a fun one though. I like these kind of interesting, challenging airports, especially to do an IPC or with a student who's just about ready to go for the check ride. Something challenging like this.
And another good one, especially because there's typically a marine layer here, so you're going to break out down there on that final approach some point. And remember, this is a VOR alpha approach. It's not an approach to a runway. It's an approach to the airport. And so you need to circle to land once you get there, and you can take a look at those runways there, that when you break out on final, this can be confusing to a lot of lower experienced pilots, and even high time pilots, I should say, that when you break out and see these angled runways, know which one is which. I have my students draw out the two runways and which one they're going to land on and draw an arrow so they know how they're going to fly that circle to land when they get there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. All right, let's take a dive all the way down to the south part of the state here and take a look at San Diego Gillespie Field. This is just a little bit east of downtown. And this is another one. It's a little hard to see from this diagram, but we've got terrain all quadrants pretty close into the airport, right there on the north side of the airport, on the south side of the airport, hills out to the west, and a lot of terrain out here to the east and southeast. And that's where our approach comes in. And this one was interesting to me because so far as I know, this is the only localizer approach that's a circling only. There is no straight in. Every other localizer I'm aware of is a straight in approach. I'm sure there are others, but this was interesting. So why wouldn't this approach be a straight in approach?
Yeah, and there are two reasons an approach wouldn't be a straight in. One is the angle at which it approaches the runways I think it's more than 30 degrees. It has to be circle to land. And then the steepness of the approach is the other factor. And yeah, there it is. Look at that.
There's also a third criteria for that.
Oh, is that right?
The runway has to be an instrument runway.
Oh, good
There's
point.
actually on Cape Cod, there's an airport that it meets the straight in, the angle criteria. It meets the descent gradient criteria, but it's basically a gravel runway. There's no paint on it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you can't have an approach to a gravel runway. So it's an approach to an airport. And like this approach is a precision localizer to get you basically into the pattern.
Yep. Yeah, and it's pretty high. It's the MDA is 1,100 feet above the ground.
So if you can't get an IFR, just go VFR.
I used to say that at the commuter. If the weather is too bad to go IFR, just cancel and go VFR. And here's a
right. We have
example.
many airports like that in California that have higher IFR minimums than the VFR minimums, which is that should be a big red flag.
Okay, so now on to some kind of weird stuff that we have in California. You've seen that one, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's is that the Ivanpah? That's
exactly.
Yeah, that's the one that's on the way to Vegas. I just drove past that, but even up at 30,000 feet, those are blinding. It's a lot of mirrors pointed at those 3 water tanks to heat up the water to generate electricity with the hot water, with the steam. But they get so bright with all those thousands of mirrors reflecting the sunlight onto the tower to heat it up. They're very bright.
and this is an example I thought of you see some icon like this on the chart that you're not familiar with, the place to go is the Aeronautical Chart User's Guide. You should have a copy of this, and it's available for free as one of the documents in ForeFlight. You should have this on your iPad if you're using ForeFlight or whatever app you're using. You should have this. And this is what it says. It's a high energy radiation areas. Typically, it's an invisible spectrum, light in this case. And this thing is so bright. When it first turned on, what, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I think, there was a report of a professional pilot in the flight levels over southern Utah who saw this thing and thought it was an airplane just about to hit him, and he took evasive action for this light that's 100 miles away. It is so bright.
It is amazing how bright that is. And Bruce Cohen just said that it's not water in there. I'm corrected. It's liquid sodium. I did not know that. Now I do. Yeah. So
liquid sodium, it can maintain the heat well into the night. So well after the sun goes down, that sodium is still molten. They can still generate electricity with it.
That's interesting. Always learning. And Melissa again posted a link to the to download the chart user's guide. So any app that you use, or even if you don't use an app, you can click that and download it on your computer. It's a very handy thing to see. If you can find things you don't know what they are, then go to that chart user's guide and look it up.
And let me just comment here. Melissa has been so helpful posting all these things in here. We should figure out a way to give her a raise.
Yeah, she needs to earn what we're earning for doing this. I'll give her half of what I'm being paid. How about that?
I'll give her half of what I'm being paid too.
Perfect.
Okay, here's another one that's kind of interesting down also in the San Diego region. Here's the brownfield over here, and the Pogi VOR is right here. Is the Otay Reservoir, and a little bit on the east side of that is this airport. It says objectionable.
Again, a good reason to have the chart user's guide, because when you see that, that's not the name of the airport.
It'd be kind of a lengthy call on the CTAF frequency, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and so yeah, if you look it up in the chart user's guide, that's what you'll see. It's associated with an airport symbol. It is objectionable airspace determination has been made for this airport, and you see a lot of these around the DFW class Bravo airspace as well, because there's a lot of air parks out there, and they're very close to the class Bravo airspace. This one in particular, if you look at, there's a parachute jumping going on, right, and they fall right through the Bravo airspace. It's a little bit frightening.
Dropping meat bombs right through the class Bravo.
Right.
The good news is it's highly likely that the jump plane is going to be talking to SoCal Tracon operating in that class Bravo airspace. So you'll be able to get advisories of that if you listen. But you know, there's no airport information here. There's no runway length or elevation or CTAF frequency, nothing. So it's probably a private strip in somebody's backyard.
Yep, there's an airport there. It's not in a good place, and be very careful.
So, and also I would point out here, the FAA Regional Airports Office are responsible for airspace determination. So this is part of the process. If you buy a ranch out in the middle of nowhere and you want to put a runway on there, get it approved as an airport, even a private airport, there's a process you have to go through, and the FAA, it takes part in that, and they'll make this determination and decide whether to say objectionable on there.
Fair enough. And if I see that, I probably just won't go there. And Jerome Swartz put that it's an objectionable airport. This one is used for ultralights, very, very short runway, and ultralights, I would imagine they stay pretty low in the pattern there. So it probably does not interfere, but if we as airplane pilots are flying around, it's probably not one that we want to use.
I would agree with that. Might be able to get in there on my 182, but
you can always do it once. You might not be able to get out.
I might have to take the wings off to get out. Yeah, and it could be useful in an emergency. There's a lot of strips, a lot of places. As I'm flying across the country, I'm constantly looking. Okay, I think I could land my airplane there or wherever. Oh, Nichols Field, he says. Never heard of it.
Oh, very cool. That's why when we teach, we learn. And
indeed,
I don't know where the parachute jumping aircraft are departing out of for the parachute jump zone there, but just be very careful when you see those. And now ForeFlight does depict where those jump zones are. It's not always accurate, and the parachute jumpers don't always stay exactly in that circle. So really keep your eyes out. You haven't lived until you've seen a falling human in front of your airplane. I've had that happen, and it was probably more frightening for him than it was for us.
Probably so. Yeah, my guess is those airplanes probably are coming out of Brown Field down there. They got
Yeah,
that
that's
drop
what
zone,
Jerome
that
just
drop
said.
zone right in the middle is a prison. So you don't want to miss.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding.
All right, and that wraps up our tour around the state. So just with some general flying tips here for flying around in and around California, but really anywhere, you want to plan ahead, do a little bit of research, look at for some of these resources that we've talked about. Use everything you can if you're not familiar with the area.
Right, it's what you don't know that's going to get you. So know as much as you can.
And right next to that is radio skills. If there's a frequency there on the chart, use it, listen in on it at least, talk to air traffic control to the extent that you can. They are, especially if you're operating in an area that you're not familiar with, that's their job, is to be familiar with this airspace, and they can point you away from problem areas, or if one of those jump planes is operating, they'll know it. They communicate quite often around the Lake Elsinore and what's the other one up there? Paris Valley Airport. They got a special call sign there, moonshine. So if you hear somebody moonshine 1, moonshine 2 on frequency, those are the jump planes. Oh boy, yikes. And know the airspace, know the rules in all the alphabet airspace we have. But we're not talking about much Class A airspace today, but we visited airports around a lot of Class Bravo, Charlie, and Delta airspace. Be familiar with the rules in that airspace, what equipment you have to have, what your communications requirements are, your airspeed limits rather. A lot of these airports we showed you were below Class Bravo. So if you're in a fast mover, you have to slow down below 200 knots. So you have to be familiar with all that stuff as you operate around, and so that you should have a working knowledge of it, so you don't have to look it up when you're in the airplane trying to do these flights.
Exactly. And how far away you have to stay from clouds and what the visibility is. Because if there's no clouds, do we care if we're in echo airspace? Not so much. But if there's clouds, we care because IFR aircraft could be popping out of those clouds. And that's a very dangerous thing and very common in our airspace for IFR, VFR mixing like that.
And know your capabilities. So we touched on Big Bear there. So know the capabilities of you as a pilot, as well as your airplane's capabilities, and don't push them. Jolie has a great program she's been presenting. Jolie Lucas has been presenting on personal minimums. And these personal minimums involve not just visibility and cloud clearance requirements like Brian just mentioned, but think also about maximum crosswind or headwind that you're comfortable operating in, maximum temperatures, minimum length of runway that you're comfortable with in your airplane. And you should, as often as possible, be working hopefully with an instructor on expanding your range of capabilities, getting more familiar with how your airplane is going to operate, so that you are more comfortable, more aware, and you're not left guessing in the moment.
Right. And grab an instructor and go to one of these airports, or fly around this airspace, or even get some ground and get the credit for the wings. Do it frequently and use different instructors. Don't always use the same one, or you're always going to get the same viewpoint. Mike and I have the benefit of flying with numerous different pilots. And the benefit of that is I learn different ways of doing things that I wouldn't otherwise learn. I get to take the things I like, discard the things I don't like. So fly with a variety of instructors as well.
Especially when you're new to the airplane. I'm new to the 787. I've been flying it only about a year and a half now. And so I'm still constantly learning things. And most of my first officers have been on the airplane a lot longer than me, in operating in all these theaters. So they understand it better than I can. So yeah, you best believe I'm a sponge as I'm operating this airplane. I'm learning from everybody everywhere. Often I'll have three co-pilots with me. So I get 4 different opinions in the cockpit on how to do something. But it's been very beneficial as I'm gaining experience in the airplane.
Same with me. And from, on the Airbus, I got 500 hours already, but I'm still learning. I learned something from my first officer last night. And in my Citabria, I'll go up with an instructor with whom I hadn't flown, and he'll show me something, or she will show me something that I hadn't seen before. And I am still learning. The more people you can fly with, the more instructors, the more pilots, the more you'll get out of it.
Yep. So know where the weather is, know what the weather is and how it's going to be changing, know what your requirements are, whether you're VFR and you have the cloud clearance requirements, or IFR. When do you need to have an alternate? What can you use for an alternate? How do you use that airport as an alternate? Best to have an idea. And also, if you're flying into an area with weather, it's a good idea to keep in mind an area that doesn't have any weather. Someplace
Yeah, I was
that's
going to say, know where the weather isn't.
exactly, just as
Yeah.
important.
Yep.
And when in doubt, slow down and ask for help. In the worst case, if you're not talking to anybody, you can dial up 121.5 and get on emergency frequency. Although we'd rather you didn't have to get that far, that you're talking to air traffic control and you've got a good solid plan and a backup plan in mind. In the airplane is not the place to be trying to figure out what you're going to do. You should have those options determined to the greatest extent possible before you get in the airplane.
Right. And that's the best advice I can see on there right there. Go slow, take your time, don't rush, and ask ATC for help. They are glad to help. And it doesn't mean you're admitting any kind of defeat or fault when you ask for help. It means you're doing the right thing.
Yep. And for me, the most important part is enjoy the view and have fun. California is a beautiful place to fly. The mountains, especially in the wintertime, they hopefully soon they'll start to get some snow on them. It's just beautiful flying around the mountains, and we've got the oceans, the beautiful shorelines, forests everywhere. We got desert, we got it all going on in California. And I couldn't imagine flying somewhere where it's flat all the time. It would be boring.
We really do. Don't take for granted the things that we as pilots get to enjoy, and the things that we get to see that often form the bond that unites most of us. And it's just, don't forget to slow down and enjoy that view.
Exactly. So fly safe, fly more, and have some fun along the way. And pluggables here, Brian, you got a website, don't you?
I do, captainschiff.com/SoCal for a lot of the links that we've had here. And I think there are a couple that I don't have on there, but I will be updating it. Feel free to look at that. And Mike has the other airports that we showed. He's got a YouTube channel with not just the last presentation that we did covering more airports, but all of the other stuff that he's done, most recently on the Garmin 430, 530 stuff. There's some great stuff on his YouTube channel.
All right. And with that, then we are done. Thank you so much for listening. It's good of you to come and sit around and look at a couple of grizzled old airline captains talk about flying little airplanes for a little while. And it's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting us. And
thank you to everybody who participated in the chat and provided the good advice, and that kind of input makes this interactive when we can't be together. So I really do like that. Thank you for everybody.
Me too. And so the last thing we get to do is we get to give away some door prizes. Jolie gave us a couple of names here. So the first thing is, she did mention we have some prizes that were awarded right from the outset before we got going with this. So please, Jolie, chime in if I'm about to do something wrong here. But to start with, a reminder that these prizes are only winnable if you are a member of SoCal Pilots. We've had a couple people who turned up in our random drawing who are not SoCal Pilots members yet. So if you join, you can get your name on the list and win one of these great things. And you can do that at calpilots.org. So for Carol's portion of the talk here, the winner of the Gary Reeves book, here's my copy of it, edited by some clown there you might have been listening to for the last hour or so. I got to work with Gary on preparing the final copy for that. That was kind of a fun deal. It's an excellent book full of tips for single pilot IFR flying. So that book.
Right here, right?
Say again?
No, that was an oops.
Oh, okay. Let's see. So the winner of the book is Adam Verdin, Verdin. We know who you are. We know how to get a hold of you, and we will get this book to you. The Precise Flight Pulse Oximeter was won by member Roberto Gonzalez. So we'll get that shipped out to you, and we'll be in touch with you about how and where you want that. And the MyGo Flight Custom Embroidered Pro Flight Bag, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that. That went to member Andrew Pomerantz. So let me see, did I have
and just while you're pausing, Mike, so we will be contacting folks, and most times you're going to be directly contacting the vendor, so they will drop ship the item directly to you. So we will be contacting you, and congratulations to those first members.
Awesome. I wish I was on that list. But I'm holding out for one of the prizes coming up here. So for Brian's and my talk, The winner of this precise flight pulse oximeter is who? Was there a change on that one?
Yep, that's it. It goes to Sue
Okay.
with the
Sue Hirabayashi.
yay.
Woohoo!
Yes, and she's a CalPilot member. Congratulations, Sue. We will
Nice.
contact you about getting your item to you.
All right, and the next one is, I gotta forward this to the next screen here. The AOPA travel pack with the t-shirt and the tumbler and the packing cube. And that goes to CalPilots member Cindy Gamblin. So congratulations, Cindy. Got some new airwear to rock around the airport.
Cool.
And finally, the big one, I'm hoping I win this one, the Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset, $900 value. So this is what you can win. This sort of thing is what you can win if you sign up and become a CalPilots member. And this one goes to member Jonathan Lang. So congratulations, Jonathan. You got yourself a really nice headset.
And again, we will be contacting you winners, and Lightspeed will be drop shipping your brand new Zulu 3 to you, Jonathan, and congratulations.
And that concludes our presentation.